كان صار لي 5 سنين بجهاز أمن الدولي، وهون توثقت علاقتي برفيق الحريري، وكان صار لي تقريباً عملت أول 4 سنين مع رفيق الحريري كان اسمها فرع المعلومات يومتها، إنشاء جهاز المعلومات. بهالفترة كان بنيت علاقة ثقة أنا ورفيق الحريري. يعني ب 24/12/2004 يعني اجاني مصدر معلومات انه بحملك رساله لرفيق الحريري خليه ينتبه كانه في جو اغتيال الحقيقه. وانا جيت لعنده قلت له دوله الرئيس لازم تنتبه. انا بالنهايه كان جوابه انه بالنهايه انا عندي ضمانات دوليه، عندي علاقات دوليه. بيجي مصدر ثاني بيأكد المعلومات الأولية، برجع تماماً فوراً أنا بتواجد عند رئيس الحريق رجاءً انتبه قد ما فيك عم يحضروا اغتيال الحقيقة، وإذا ظرفك بيسمح غادر البلد بهالمرحلة هي الحقيقة.
Sous la colonne de fumée, ce qu'il reste du cortège qui ramenait Rafik Hariri du Parlement. L'explosion a blessé une centaine de personnes et en a tué 9. Rafik Hariri a été extrait rapidement de la carcasse de sa voiture, mais son décès a été constaté à l'hôpital. Un cratère large d'une dizaine de mètres causé par l'explosion d'une voiture piégée d'au moins 350 kg d'explosifs. L'ancien Premier ministre avait peu de chance d'échapper à l'attentat.
Ils sont des centaines de milliers. Ils convergent tous vers la place des Martyrs, au centre de Beyrouth. Les slogans sont en fait des insultes à la Syrie et à son président. En clair, la Syrie dehors.
Hariri was a threat to Syrian domination in Lebanon. Syria has been a close ally to Hezbollah. Rafik Hariri was pushing too hard on things that were going to undermine their position in Lebanon, and that was not to be allowed.
عماد مغنية شريك أكيد بالقرار لأنه بالنهاية كان هالقد والتنفيذ كان على عاتق مجموعاته تبع الاغتيالات.
Le Hezbollah a pris le pouvoir le jour de l'assassinat. Ils ont pris le terrain, le gouvernement, la présidence de la République, ils ont neutralisé l'armée. C'est à ce moment-là que se déclenche l'élimination physique au Liban de quiconque pouvait dire non au parti de Dieu de Hezbollah.
إذا أخذت ماركو بتحط راسك وبتنام وفرده على جنبه وريقه وكل شيء من أحسن ما يكون، ما حدا بيقول له وين رايح.
We determined through our investigation that Hezbollah was operating like a global drug cartel. So we wanted to apply the same logic that was successful going after the Italian organized crime families, going after the cartels in Colombia.
Moi, j'étais une proie simple.
Qui a cherché à vous tuer?
Les Syriens, le Hezbollah.
Clearly, they thought they could operate with impunity in Lebanon.
I mean, the cartels are good, but Hezbollah is another whole level.
The assassination of Prime Minister Rafik Hariri sent a shockwave throughout Lebanon and the international community. All eyes were on Syria, which was accused of being behind the attack. Bashar al-Assad's army, which had partly occupied Lebanon for 30 years, had to withdraw, harangued by the people. With the Syrians' withdrawal, Hezbollah lost a long-term ally and protector. Worse still, Hezbollah found itself accused of being involved in Rafik Hariri's assassination. Undermined, it resumed its violent activities. First in Lebanon, in a campaign against its political opponents. Then, beyond its frontiers, by provoking its sworn enemy, Israel.
لدينا قناعة بأن الأسرى في الكيان الإسرائيلي لا يمكن أن يخرجوا إلا بتبادل الأسرى. يعني يجب أن يكون لدينا أسرى إسرائيليين حتى نتمكن من إخراج الأسرى اللبنانيين موجودين في السجون الإسرائيلية.
Viennent d'être capturés au Liban par le Hezbollah.
2 militaires ont été capturés par le Hezbollah.
On ne connaît pas encore les circonstances exactes de l'enlèvement de 2 soldats israéliens par le Hezbollah, mais l'événement est considéré comme gravissime en Israël.
وطبعا كنا نتوقع أن يحصل حرب لكن بنسبة قليلة جدا 5% 10%. يعني لم نكن نتوقع أن تحصل حرب بهذه الضخامة.
Massés le long de la frontière israélo-libanaise, toute la journée, les chars ont bombardé la région. Les hélicoptères aussi. Les forces israéliennes sont entrées au sud Liban.
ממשלת לבנון, שהחיזבאללה הוא חלק ממנה, מנסה לערער את היציבות האזורית. לבנון היא האחראית.
إذا الإسرائيلي بده يفكر بأي عمل عسكري إذا كان هدفه استعادة الأسيرين فهو واهم 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 حتى ينقطع النفس.
وأنا هون خليني شك تماماً إنه قد يكون أحد أسباب حرب تموز هو نحن مواجهتنا لحسن نصر الله ولحزب الله بالوقائع اللي بتقول إنه حزب الله قاتل رفيق الحريري. هو بلش، هو خطف يومتها جندين إسرائيليين لفجر الوضع مبدئيا حيا.
We stayed the first days, and Hezbollah was coming, you have to leave, you have to leave. So I believe profoundly that Hezbollah expected what would happen later. They expected these extremely heavy bombardments. since 20 years I'm living here in the southern suburbs of Beirut, which are called the Dahir. So we are really in a kind of ghetto here, controlled by Hezbollah. During the war, there was a group of Hezbollah fighters sitting in our garden, discussing, in other words, having a kind of meeting. And I was panicking because I thought if the drones will capture Hezbollah sitting in our garden, they will bombard the whole house. And as there was this kind of tension, I made a very bad joke. I don't know what took me, but I just said, "Do you would like to have a picture of you?" And somebody answers me, "If you take one, the Americans would pay you $1 million. So, I said, sorry, it was a bad joke. I will go up to the apartment, I need some clothes, and I will leave. So I left, and 2 years later, the Hezbollah commander, Imad Mughniyeh, is assassinated. And all of a sudden, there's this huge 3-meter-long posters everywhere in the street of Imad Mughniyeh. And I'm telling myself, I have seen him. And at one point, it just made this click, and I realized the guy who told me the Americans would have paid you $1 million was Imad Mughniyeh.
After 33 days of Israeli bombings, Hezbollah obtained a ceasefire without releasing the 2 hostages. In Beirut, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, celebrated the victory of the resistance over the historical enemy. Hassan Nasrallah strengthened his hero status throughout the Arab world. He was the first to humiliate Israel, the little Satan. Money was needed to finance Lebanon's reconstruction. This was the moment the DEA had been waiting for. Its agents in Washington were monitoring all the movements of funds arriving in Beirut. In the funds coming from around the world, they searched for drug money.
In 2006, the Israeli Air Force destroyed every major bridge in Lebanon. They destroyed many of the road systems. Airport was impacted. The place was chaos. Lebanon was in deep trouble financially. Normally, somebody bombs a country, their credit rating goes down, money doesn't flood into their country, okay? I'm a finance guy. This is not how things normally work. But in Lebanon, miracles happen. They need the money, and lo and behold, what happens? This amazing amount of money was rushing into Lebanon.
I remember well, the war ended at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. Hezbollah was present everywhere. People were able to go somewhere to complain that they had lost their house. A member of the family was killed. Thousands of families had lost everything. Hezbollah was offering compensation. People were receiving around $10,000. The money was, of course, coming from Iran.
نحن نتلقى مساعدات من إيران، وهذا أمر معلن وواضح، لكن حزب الله أيضا لديه موارد من أموال الخمس التي يدفعها المؤمنون. المؤمن بحسب الوضع الشيعي يجب أن يدفع كل سنة من أرباحه التي تبقى لديه 20% يدفعها لعالم الدين من أجل صرفها على قضايا المسلمين وعلى الفقراء وعلى كل هذه الأمور.
Hezbollah makes plenty of money through business activity. It makes money through donations. But at the end of the day, they're reliant on Iran for their big bucks.
And how much money, more or less, does it represent?
Hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year in cash.
عادة نحن لا نتكلم عن أرقام الموازنة ولا عن أعداد السلاح ولا عن أعداد الأفراد. هذه من أسرار الحزب.
In 2007, the Lebanese banking system began to explode in growth. We realized, and what I realized as I started to look into it, a huge amount of that money was drug money. But the key thing is, who organized this scheme? Well, ultimately, Mughniyeh himself.
Hezbollah leaders have made public statements that the drug industry is forbidden. Sometimes the bad guys lie, and they look the other way.
The U.S. Treasury Department is the finance ministry of the United States. And we knew we had power, we knew we had tools, we knew we had authorities to reach into Beirut, to reach into the Lebanese financial system, and put our finger on the scale a little bit and say, okay, now we're going to start impacting your ability to feel comfortable where you thought you were the safest.
The US government went on the offensive. The agents of the DEA received the order to infiltrate the illicit financial circuits woven by Mughniyeh, the Party of God's military strategist. Wiretaps allowed them to identify international money laundering circuits and the organization of Hezbollah's hidden networks that dealt with the South American drug cartels.
So the team identifying the network, we identified what we called the super facilitators, like the biggest members of the organization. Like in an organized crime family, these were the bosses, right? Or in a cartel, we call them cell heads, right? With Hezbollah, it was the super facilitators.
Pretty quickly, we identified a Latin American drug lord tied to Medellin, but operating in Lebanon and looked like Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. A Lebanese male called Joumaa. Joumaa was far, far above a guy like Chekri Harb because he's a very powerful man.
He's the bridge between the Colombian cartel's money and Hezbollah's. mean, he was like the only guy who was a Sunni who was living in the hardest core Shia area of southern Beirut, you know, in a beautiful apartment, I believe, on the beach, guarded by Hezbollah guards and things. Very unusual.
So our entire focus was on Ayman Joumaa and how we can possibly infiltrate his network right in Lebanon. Ayman Joumaa wanted to meet with us. Sometimes our top international targets, they get wind of the indictment, or we let them know, sort of in a quiet way, hey, you know, you're indicted. And what often happens is through a lawyer they have, or maybe even directly, it could start with a direct conversation, is that the bad guy wanted to see if he could work out some sort of deal. It was under the guise that Ayman Joumaa was going to cooperate with the Drug Enforcement Administration, which I was never going to let that happen if I could. In my mind, this is the guy that we need to put in jail, not to cooperate. So we set up a meeting. It was actually at the Trump Tower in Panama City. The agents and the prosecutors and the lawyer were all wearing really nice clothes, and I decided to just go in my shorts and a T-shirt into the Trump Tower. And you know, I was the only guy wearing shorts and a T-shirt, but I think I was doing it on purpose because I didn't want to give Joumaa any idea that I thought like I'm doing anything special for the guy. From my 20 years of experience working with criminals and mafiosos, that he appeared to me to be a hardcore mafia member. So anytime we caught each other's glance, he had this look of, if I get the chance, I'm gonna kill you. He's a mob boss, no doubt. I stayed real quiet through most of the meeting, and then finally I said, you haven't given us shit. There's absolutely nothing that you've given us that we don't already know. So we went our separate ways. It does appear that both inside and outside the Trump Tower, they were surreptitiously taking pictures of us. It was basically certain that Hezbollah had launched an intelligence investigation on Asher and myself, basically the Cassandra task force. They tried to contract other criminal groups, including cartels. So they would pay if these people would kill us.
Are you scared?
No, definitely not scared. No, I mean, I took it as, you took it as a compliment. And then you also felt like, wow, we must really be doing our job because they're so pissed off at us, they're so angry. You'd have to ask Dave Asher if he was scared. I don't know. I wasn't scared, but who knows?
When I started Project Cassandra with my partner Jack Kelly and our fearless leader Derek Maltz, they knew I had another job, but I don't think they quite realized where I worked. You know, I worked at 375 Park Avenue in New York on the 33rd floor for a $2 billion hedge fund where I was a partner. This is my side project. You know, so half the day I'm managing billions of dollars in loans and equity investments. And the rest of the day, I'm hanging out with guys like Jack Kelly and others inside the syndicate, which was like, you know, I'd fly from New York on a plane, you know, right into Dulles, and I'd like be dressed like this. You know, business suit. These guys were wearing blue jeans and, you know, like T-shirts and shit, and, you know, acting like a bunch of baboons. And I'm like, hey, I just met with, you know, George Soros. You know, I mean, like.
The DEA finally decided to charge Ayman Joumaa with drug trafficking and money laundering. But he had already fled. Operation Cassandra was stepped up. 100 agents were now working to find Ayman Joumaa's accomplices. The investigation focused on Venezuela, a South American country hostile to the US. Its president, Hugo Chavez, opened its frontiers to the historical foes of the Great Satan. First and foremost, the Islamic Republic of Iran and its protege, Hezbollah.
I come from a family that believes in government service and serving society, and it was a path to maybe try to do a little bit of good in the world. We were out of DEA's Special Operations Division, and we were called the Bilateral Investigative Unit. So originally we were focused on kingpins, kind of the untouchables in the world, but we quickly started to really see a big nexus between a lot of these groups involved in terrorism and how they're being financed through the narcotics trade. Derek Maltz was our special agent in charge for most of my tour there. Derek's the best.
And we started realizing how Hezbollah was moving operations into Venezuela in an opportunity to generate, millions and millions of dollars to help them fund their operations. It was very apparent after the war in 2006 with Israel, Ayman Joumaa and the network of Hezbollah operatives were very closely aligned with the corrupt military and corrupt government officials at the highest level of Venezuelan government.
What happened was the majority of Colombian cocaine entering the United States and Europe comes out of Venezuela. It's not Venezuelan cocaine, but Venezuela is the gateway. And through our penetrations in Venezuela, we also started to learn a lot about Hezbollah.
We did learn through our investigations that a Venezuelan official went over to a meeting in Damascus, Syria, and was offered the assistance of Hezbollah. There has been reporting that it was Nasrallah at the meeting. I think it was much more likely that it was Mughniyeh, the head of military operations for Hezbollah. Clearly, both were very contrary to the national security policies of the United States. They believe they shared a common enemy, and Hezbollah is certainly offering their expertise in resistance in creating malicious systems. Some of the other, I think, interesting connections that came out were, for example, there's an airline out of Venezuela called Conviasa. Some have called it Aero Terror. And we started to learn there's a weekly flight to Tehran. Very often it's stopped over in Damascus.
Planes loaded with weapons, RPGs, surface-to-air missiles, AK rifles, into Venezuela from these flights. And also they were picking up large sums of cash, cocaine, bringing that stuff back into the Middle East.
You get 7 to 10 tons coming out of Venezuela a week, okay? 7 to 10 tons is a lot of coke. This partnership, this narco-terrorist partnership is emerging between the government of Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and the Iranians and Hezbollah.
Le damos la bienvenida a un insigne líder como usted, líder de un pueblo heroico, el pueblo iraní, y líder de una revolución, hermana de la revolución venezolana, la revolución islámica. Hoy Venezuela está de júbilo. Bienvenido, hermano. Salam aleikum.
drugs became part of the resistance. Narco-resistance. Trafficking the dope erodes the infidels, it hurts their youth, spoils their power.
We started to see some really higher level Venezuelan officials, persons like Tarek al-Assad, who's the former Minister of Interior and I believe the former Vice President. He's of Lebanese Syrian descent, ties back to that part of the world. Tarek is one of those really powerful officials who has so much influence in a country that he allows the system to operate. He allows the drug traffickers to be protected. He allows flights to leave without people doing their job and inspecting it. He allows travel documents to be issued for persons in other countries that otherwise might not be eligible for receiving those travel documents. He allows massive amounts of monies to be laundered through formal financial institutions.
Yesterday, the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, known as OFAC, designated Venezuelan national Tarek al-Assad as a specially designated narcotics trafficker pursuant for playing a significant role in international narcotics trafficking.
Hezbollah wanted to get closer and closer to being involved in the distribution and laundering. So they became sort of an end-to-end element in the drug trafficking. You know, not something you normally see a terrorist organization do. When it came to the drug business, these guys were eager to make a buck and very aggressive and not necessarily that careful.
ولطالما سعوا للنيل منه خلال أكثر من 20 عاماً إلى أن اختاره الله تعالى شهيداً على يد قتلة أنبيائه والمفسدين في أرضه الذين يعرفون.
U.S. and Israeli teams put together a very, very small explosive. Ultimately, one night coming out of Syrian military intelligence, Mughniyeh got into his vehicle and the explosive was detonated, killing him instantly.
Rahimahullah.
The man whose existence was denied during life, but in death embraced. He and only he held this mystique. The removal of Imad Mughniyeh, I think, was a very significant takedown for the organization.
With Imad Mughniyeh's death, Hezbollah didn't just lose a military legend. It lost the man who controlled the organization's illicit finances. This weakened its power within Lebanon. But the party of God is most dangerous when threatened. Hassan Nasrallah took the ultimate risk, a coup to tighten his grip on the country.
Ce jour-là, Beyrouth se vide totalement. L'armée libanaise disparaît comme par enchantement. Et le chef d'état-major, qui était un ami, m'a dit « Sors de chez toi, utilise une voiture blindée, ne t'arrête à aucun barrage. Fonce à travers les barrages et si on tire sur toi, riposte, que tes gens ripostent. » Je suis ministre en fonction. Ce jour-là, les milices du Hezbollah, en blouse noire, ils investissent la capitale. Exactement comme la marche de Mussolini sur Rome.
بالنهاية بعد حرب تموز نزل يعني كشف قناعه مش مدافع عن لبنان بوش الإيراني بوش الإسرائيل إنما بالنهاية بده يحط إيده كاملة على لبنان. هو كان عم يعمل قضم للدولة شوي شوي تدريجيا بكل أسف وعم ياكلها لقمة ورا لقمة الحقيقة.
Ce grignotage permanent du pouvoir est en train, à ce moment-là, de nous faire avancer vers ce qui sera plus tard et l'est désormais maintenant un pouvoir absolu de Hassan Nasrallah sur le Liban.
ما حصل في 7 أيام وضع حداً سريعاً لمؤامرة كبرى كانت تحضر لهذه المقاومة. طيب أنا أقول لكم كان مشروعهم في السنوات الماضية العمل على إيجاد صراع وقتال بين الجيش والمقاومة وفشلوا.
Il y a un décideur, c'est Hassan Nasrallah, mais à travers lui, le grand décideur, c'est Téhéran.
إذا أنا بشوفها كانت محاولة انقلاب أو وضع يد كاملة على كل لبنان تنفيذاً للأجندة تبعته أو الاستراتيجية تبعته إنه تحويل لبنان إلى ولاية إيرانية.
They have been building up over the years a parallel system. So you can go here to a supermarket controlled by Hezbollah where you find Iranian products. There are hospitals under the control of Hezbollah. There are banks under the control of Hezbollah. I mean, Iran has a long-term strategy.
يعني اليوم استراتيجيتهم هي كان في وهم تاريخي انه نعيد انشاء الامبراطوريه الفارسيه القديمه اللي وصلت لشواطئ البحر المتوسط سابقا.
Thanks to Iran's unfailing support, Hezbollah has considerable control over Lebanese political, economic, and judicial life. But in its impossible investigation, the DEA had a significant advantage. It had unlimited means. By tracing Hezbollah's narco dollars, the DEA reached the Shiite Empire's outpost, Africa, which is home to a large Lebanese community.
So during Project Cassandra, we actually identified probably one of the biggest trade-based money laundering schemes that I'm aware of to support terrorist organization like Hezbollah. West Africa was a hub for global cocaine trafficking around the world. And so we started putting a lot of resources into West Africa. We had aerial photos in 2006, and the land was completely vacant along the coastline.
So there's just these big stretches of beach. And then in 2007, you start to see these used car lots start emerging. By 2008, they're full of cars, like 30, 40,000 cars a week are going through these car lots.
We didn't really understand it. I mean, nothing wrong with importing cars and doing, international car business. It's a legal business.
Who owned those car lots? Well, quite a few of them were owned by Lebanese who were supporters of Hezbollah.
Ali Karoubi was living in Benin. He was one of the main guys that established working with Aman Joumaa and all of these guys that were establishing Hezbollah's operations in Africa.
They would take the drug money, buy used cars, send those used cars to West Africa, sell the used cars, then send the money, the clean money, back to Lebanon. And then it would go make its way back to South America to buy more cocaine, and this thing would continue.
And the beauty of it is there were legitimate business owners that were making money. People in West Africa were getting cars, so they were happy, right? And Hezbollah, under the radar, was getting their cut of the profits to develop the cash flow that they needed to carry out their global agenda.
أما تبييض الأموال، أي تبييض أموال، نحن ما عندنا حسابات لا في البنوك ولا لدينا شركات تجارية. هناك أفراد لديهم تجارات، لديهم مصالح، لكن هم شيعة. يمكن يكون بعض الأفراد عنده أعمال مخالفة للقانون أو ما شابه، شو لنا علاقة نحن بالموضوع؟
We estimated about $200 million a month was being generated from this scheme. That's over, do the math, right? 200 billion times 12, right? That's $2.4 billion annually.
Figuring that out was enough of a challenge, let me tell you. It was complicated. And, you know, the money moves back to buy more narcotics, and this thing keeps repeating. Except, you know, as it repeats, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's when we started to see our opportunity to try to choke it.
Hezbollah had a plan in place, and then that was, let's take over a bank. And the easiest way to do that was in Lebanon.
By 2009, 2010, when we started to look at the Lebanese Canadian bank seriously, we wanted to figure out what this bank was doing, and then I wanted to penetrate the bank and get inside it. And we were Colombian drug traffickers. Not me, my guys. And money launderers. And what was the relationship between Lebanese Canadian Bank and Hezbollah? We later learned that, in effect, Hezbollah had about a 28% ownership of Lebanese Canadian Bank.
For us, it was the smoking gun because it backed up all the analysis and the other evidence we had been gathering.
نحن بعدنا على الدقة القديمة ننقل الأموال بالمحافظ يعني لكن لأنه في سيارات لا ننقلها على الدابة وإلا لو ما في سيارات كنا نقلناها على الحمير والأحصنة.
You know, they take hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, they literally bring it on in on pallets, dump it in the bank, and suddenly it's inside the Lebanese banking system.
How much?
Billions. Billions of dollars a year.
Hezbollah accounts through credits and debits moved $5 billion in 18 months, just through Lebanese Canadian bank accounts. That shows you the significant amount of money.
And I wanted to target that bank. And then I wanted to bankrupt that bank. And that's exactly what we did.
Section 311 is often described as the atomic bomb of Treasury authorities. So the practical result means that you lose as a matter of law, your access to the US financial system, in this case, Lebanese Canadian Bank. It becomes much, much more difficult to engage in any dollar transactions. Informally, you'll probably lose almost all of your financial relationships anywhere in the world.
I like to think of it as a big bowl of yarn. And as you pulled the string of yarn, more and more and more cases came out. Authorities are still, today, pulling at the strings of the Lebanese Canadian Bank and finding cases from North America to Africa and Europe and across the Middle East. It was a tremendously insightful window into a very, very broad range of Hezbollah activities.
The dismantling of the Lebanese Canadian Bank was a precious victory for the DEA in its global war on the financing of Hezbollah. The vice was tightening on the Shiite Islamist organization. After several years of obstruction, the inquiry into Rafiq Hariri's assassination was reopened. The UN established the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. For the first time, the divine impunity of the Party of God was publicly questioned.
The creation of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon is the result of a tragedy. The killing of a former prime minister and of 22 other persons. The STL is the first international anti-terrorist tribunal. The creation of the tribunal was a political decision. Its operation, however, is and must remain above politics.
The Special Tribunal for Lebanon is now in session. L'audience du Tribunal spécial pour le Liban est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
En 2010, je rejoins le Tribunal spécial pour le Liban, donc le TSL comme on l'appelle, et sa fonction, c'est d'enquêter non seulement sur l'assassinat de Rafiq Hariri, mais également sur un ensemble de crimes connexes. Une enquête délicate parce qu'on travaille à l'étranger, dans un contexte difficile, de tension évidemment. On se déplaçait avec des véhicules protégés, il y avait de multiples contrôles, des checkpoints, on habitait dans des endroits spécifiquement gardés. On s'entoure de 1000 précautions parce que les enquêteurs étaient quand même visés. Il y a eu une enquête libanaise également, qui est venue nourrir énormément l'enquête du tribunal spécial pour le Liban, et en particulier les investigations qui avaient été menées par un jeune officier de police libanais, Wissam Eid, qui l'a payé de sa vie.
بهالوقت هذا كان وسام عيد عم يطلع على منطقة وجود المحقق الدولي، يشرح لهم من وقت لوقت كل التفاصيل والأدلة اللي عملها مبدئيا. بإحدى الزيارات هو رجع منا بكل أسف، فجروا له موكبه وقتلوه الحقيقة.
حزب الله ما بدها اثنين يحكوا فيها. يعني ثاني مرة عطوه انذار، قولوا له إلا وسام الله يرحمه إنه كيف بلاك عنا حزب الله.
ما في جريمة كاملة، دايما في فجوة نمسك الحقيقة بالتحقيق. أنت بدك طرف خيط الصغير تمام الحقيقة.
Nearly 6 years on, and the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri remains officially unsolved. It is not for lack of evidence, evidence which points directly and indirectly to Hezbollah.
داتا الاتصالات عطتنا اشارات انه حزب الله هي مجموعه الارجح من حزب الله الحقيقه، لانه كان في مجموعه من الارقام ما بتحكي الا مع بعض البعض، حوالي 8 ارقام فقط لا غير، ما بيحكوا مع حدا ثاني للامانه، وهي الارقام شفناها انه كانت دائما وراء رفيق الحريري. ويوم الجريمة كانوا بحول مسرح الجريمة.
نحن نعتبر أن كل الأدلة هي أدلة ظرفية مبنية على الاتصالات وعلى قاعدة الاحتمالات غير الموثوقة، وفي آن معا هناك لعب بشبكة الاتصالات بطريقة غير عادية، وحزب الله لا علاقة له بالتفجير والاغتيال.
I've seen the evidence, and it's very good. It was Hezbollah who killed Hariri. You cannot fake this evidence. And if any Lebanese say, oh, they made this shit up, the CIA did, they're stupid. They're liars, stupider liars.
The indictment charges each of the four accused. That's Mr. Salim Jamil Ayash, Mr. Mustafa Amin Badruddin, Mr. Hussein Hassan Onisi, and Mr. Assad Hassan Sabra, with 4 crimes contrary to Lebanese law. We then decided to proceed to trial in absentia.
يخطئ من يتصور، هذا المستعجل بده يطلع القواوي الظني، يخطئ من يتصور أننا سنسمح بتوقيف أو اعتقال أحد من مجاهدينا، وأن اليد التي ستمتد إلى أي واحد منهم ستقطع.
It was a warning to the Lebanese state and journalists, don't come after us for Hariri, because we'll kill you. I tell you, you go to Nasrallah's office, knock on the door and say, I want to do a film about his killing Hariri, and you'll probably not come out of Lebanon alive. They don't joke around with this.
Tout ce qui est justice internationale, loi internationale, mandat d'arrêt internationaux, tout ceci n'a aucune valeur chez eux.
"15 years after Rafiq Hariri's assassination, the SDL delivered its verdict. 3 members of Hezbollah received life sentences. They've never been arrested. The 4th defendant, a top-ranking Hezbollah member, is presumed dead. Impunity continues, whilst its clandestine financing networks are recreated on other continents.
They were looking for places where they could operate. Europe is important for Hezbollah for lots of reasons. It is a place where Hezbollah can raise a lot of money. It is a place where it can carry out operations. It is close to Lebanon.
France appears in some ways to be their command and control center for their activities in the rest of Europe.